Paul Anthony Wallis. Welcome to Nature of Reality Radio. Folks, I am back with a vengeance. Great to be back, and I've been off the air. Just did a show a couple days ago that I still haven't uploaded to YouTube, but we'll be getting to that shortly. Where I've been off for a month because of Lyme disease and a couple of other issues that have slowed me down and whatnot, but I am back. And being back, though, comes with a few disclaimers of sorts. I try to do 3 shows a week on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday basis. But having done 2-hour shows for all these years has unfortunately kept my audience level to size to a minimum, and I think it's about time I change that because the lousy attention span factor really does make a difference. And as a result of that, I am going to be cutting down shows to an hour to 80 minutes at most, probably. And also, I will be uploading the shows to YouTube and also Cost.tv. Folks, please only listen to the interviews on on YouTube for 15 seconds, and then the link to the Cost.tv interview should be in the YouTube video description after 15 seconds. For the sake of giving me a YouTube view credit, please watch the rest of the interview on Cost.tv. That is a blockchain monetization channel. It's very minimum income, but it still is a little worth helping me out because the YouTube censorship Nazis have no interest in helping me monetize off ads. It's ever since Independence Day of last year, I have asked for them to let me monetize off ads, and they claim that the pandemic is keeping them from being able to do that. But that's a nice way of telling me we don't like what your show talks about, so we're not going to let you monetize. So that's the way it is. And also, folks, starting on the summer solstice, I'm pretty 99.9% sure about this, going to be making my show 60% free with the remaining 40% pay-per-view. You'll have to subscribe on Patreon to listen to the rest. It's about time that I, as well as numerous other radio show hosts, ask for our shows to be monetized. It's great to get things out for free, but with the way things are in the present day and in this time of great spirituality and awakening, it's time to try to leave the system and find other ways to make a living that don't involve enslavement, and sometimes monetizing your work is the way to go. So I hope that will but until then, you got until summer, folks. So let's try to make the most of this show and show me that you really want to listen to me by listening to my show a little more often. So with that being said, Paul Anthony Wallis, great to have you on. You're coming from Australia, land down under. Hopefully I get to go there travel there on my bucket list as one of the places. It's one of the places I want to go to. And, well, I'll give you the chance now to tell your life story regarding who you are. You're a researcher, author, and speaker. It says so on your website. Tell your life story from a primary source perspective, please, regarding who you are and what you experience that causes you to do the stuff that you do and research the stuff that you research. And then we will, after that, get into some serious questions. I will shut up and put myself on mute. I don't have Alex Jones-itis. I do not interrupt my guests. So you got the floor. Knock yourself out.
G'day, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me on your show today. And yes, I'm coming to you from the land down under where I live with my young family. And the work that I do is in researching the world's mythologies and ancestral narratives. And I like to probe them for their insights on our origin as a species and our human potential today. And that's the thing that really excites me, that knowing who we are, what we're capable of, I find a very inspiring field to be in and to be exploring. And what got me into this area, my background, was in the work of Christian ministry. For 33 years, I was involved in congregation-based ministry as a theological educator, training pastors in the science of hermeneutics, which means the principles of interpreting ancient texts, the Bible in particular. I was a church doctor, church planter, worked as an archdeacon for the Anglican Church here in Australia. And people might be thinking, how on earth did you get from there to studying human origins and the whole subject of paleo contact, our ancestors' contact with extraterrestrials? That's what my latest books, Escaping from Eden and the Scars of Eden, is all about. looks like a bit of a leap, but it isn't really, because for all my time in ministry, a lot of my work involved handling the ancient texts of the Bible. And anyone who does that, whether that's as a preacher or as a theological educator, as I was, they will notice anomalies in the stories that we generally tell from the Hebrew Scriptures and from the Bible as a whole. And often you'll find something and think, oh, that doesn't quite make sense, or well, how does that work, or that doesn't quite fit. I'm going to have to get back and look at that. I don't have a good answer to that. Indeed, any parent who's ever sat down with a children's Bible and a child will have spotted these anomalies. So a child will ask questions like, why does God say, let us make? Why does he say, let us make the humans to look like one of us? One of who? And then you get to Genesis 3, and the child will ask, death penalty for eating a piece of fruit? That's a bit harsh, isn't it? And couldn't God see something was going to go wrong? Couldn't he see what was going to happen? And who's the snake anyway? He's come from nowhere. How come he can speak? And then you've got to justify the genocide of the flood in Genesis 6, and then this bombing of human civilization into a pre-Stone Age condition because they've built a building that's too tall. All these, I'm talking about the Tower of Babel there, all these anomalies sort of sit with people, and generally you think, oh, I'm going to have to go back and look at that. But just like anybody, a pastor finds that they are chasing their tail just to make a living and to survive. And it's very rarely that we're given the time to go back and pursue our curiosity. But in the book Escaping from Eden, I talk about a moment where I suffered an ultimate frisbee injury and needed some time to convalesce. And this was my opportunity to do some study of these texts that had always fascinated me. And to be honest, that is a true story. I did have an ultimate frisbee injury, but I use it as a bit of a metaphor for various times when the universe has given me the time to pursue some deeper study. My first love is languages. I was very fortunate in the public system in the UK to learn French, German, Latin, Italian, Greek, Portuguese. And so when I went back to these texts, I go with a linguist's mind. And so my question is always, what do the words mean? And so that was the nature of my study. And very quickly I discovered some anomalous words, words that have been translated for centuries as God, but that when you go to the root meanings of the word, you find that it's a plural word. Elohim, it means the powerful ones. And it takes plural verbs and exhibits plural behaviors. And sometimes there are conflicts among the Elohim. And I began to get the idea that Elohim might be talking about plural entities. And so I asked myself the question, what would happen if you were to retranslate Elohim in the plural and reread all those ancient stories? And it was that was the red pill moment for me, and that's led me onto the whole territory of paleo contact and has resulted in the books Escaping from Eden and The Scars of Eden.
Thank you. Now, when you talk about the word Eden, a lot of people would say, okay, well, I don't think Eden is a myth. There's definitely something to it, but there's been so many different takes on this. I mean, the idea that it can be literally interpreted as the Bible says regarding two human beings that were not ashamed of not having clothes and then ate from an apple after being tempted by a snake, and the next thing they know, they were ashamed of not having any clothes on. That's not really the way it really went down, apparently. In actuality, there was something else to it, and as far as the location of Eden goes, that's a whole new can of worms. Zachariah Sitchin has his own take on this regarding how humans were created with Homo erectus DNA being matched with Anunnaki DNA to create Homo sapiens about 300,000 years ago, I think it was. And he talks about Eden being, I think, in somewhere in the Central African area down in the southern portions where the Nile River begins. Nile flows south to north. Um, and it would have been in the lower parts of, like, lower Middle Eastern parts of Africa, where he says the Garden of Eden started. But that is not necessarily accurate. Some assert there's another tale to what Eden actually is. Uh, what do you think Eden is when you hear the word Eden? Is it the Garden of Eden and that word?
Well, for me, the story really flipped around from how I'd understood it before. The moment I did that pluralization of the word Elohim, that's the exercise I take the reader through in Escaping from Eden. The stories do a flip and they line up with the ancient Sumerian accounts, the Sumerian, Babylonian, Akkadian, and Assyrian accounts. And when you read them alongside each other, it becomes quite clear that the Genesis accounts are a summary form of those read side by side, and you realize that Eden is the enclosed zone in which extraterrestrial visitors to our planet in the deep past did exactly what Zechariah Sitchin talks about, and that is adapt a hominid that was already here to try and engineer a Homo sapiens that was more amenable to working for them, doing the manual labor. And that story echoes in ancestral narratives all around the world. You can find it in Africa, Mesoamerica, India, Europe, in the Celtic countries, those stories echo. And it was when I saw the parallels that really caught my attention. The way it's translated at the moment, it's as if the Bible is there in opposition to all the other ancestral narratives of the world, as if it's saying, oh, forget those old stories, this is what really happened. But translated the way I believe it should be, they all start saying the same thing. Now, we don't read any of, in my opinion, we don't read any of these narratives as if they are like photographic accounts or diary entries of this happened and this happened. There's a lot of metaphor in the language, but when you read them side by side, it becomes clear quite quickly they're talking about the same basic storyline, and you begin to ask a different question, and that is what memory is being curated by these fantastical stories. And I believe it is the memory of visitors arriving on the planet and genetically modifying our ancestors to make us Homo sapiens sapiens. And it was not a neat and tidy single change that was made. We're told about a sequence of experiments that resulted in us plus some others on planet Earth. And I think put the stories alongside each other, and it's very difficult to frame that story in another way.
Thank you very much. You've gotten a lot of praise from people like George Noory and Erich Von Daniken, and that's certainly something to put on your list of accomplishments. When those people like that are saying that you are trying to glorify you, then you definitely, well, I guess, deserve to be glorified and have your work glorified and given a lot of credit. Um, George Noory saying that your book is like the exact quote here. Damn, I lost the page. Something about the chariots of the gods of the modern era or something like that. Yeah, this generation's chariots of the gods. Does that statement give you inspiration? Does it humble you? Does it make you feel that you're the next Erich Von Daniken? Or do you think maybe George Noory is, I don't know, maybe exaggerating a little bit and maybe taking things from two different works that really shouldn't be put together? Are there really meant to be connections between Erich Von Daniken's work and your work?
Well, there certainly are connections. I am, of course, hugely honored and absolutely thrilled when I heard George Noory say those words on Coast to Coast, and I'm very thrilled to have Erich Von Daniken endorsing The Scars of Eden. My books are not the same as his, but I have to credit Erich Von Daniken with getting me onto this whole topic when I was 11 years old with his book Chariots of the Gods. And the reason I'm thrilled to hear that comparison made is that Chariots of the Gods was a huge culture-shifting gateway book prior to Erich Von Daniken. The idea that our species had been modified by extraterrestrial visitors, even though that story had been retained by folklore around the world. It was an absolute taboo in the mainstream. It just wasn't something that normal people talked about. But when Chariots of the Gods came out, he brought out of the shadows questions that had been asked at an academic level for more than 100 years by that point, after we were able to translate the Mesopotamian cuneiforms. And he made it a subject that we would talk about at school, that people would talk about over dinner. It became a mainstream thing. And I think we shouldn't in any way diminish the significance and importance and the courage of his book, Chariots of the Gods. I read it when I was 11 years old, and it just sat at the back of my brain, percolating away for all the decades since. And so without that book, I don't think I would have been asking the same questions. I don't think I would have reached a point where I was writing Escaping from Eden and The Scars of Eden. My journey has some points in common with Erich Von Daniken's in that his start point was in the world of theology and languages, and that was my start point too. I came out of 33 years in ministry, looking at the text and realizing there's a whole other story hidden in plain sight, just a translation away from being blindingly obvious, and that when we do the translation work, it lines up with all these other narratives and with evidences in contemporary research and science. So yes, there's a significant overlap. I'm thrilled by those comparisons because my hope is that The Scars of Eden and Escaping from Eden will be gateway books for a new generation, and that once again, it will make these topics the stuff of mainstream conversation. I think every generation needs to break the taboo around these subjects and these questions. Right now, I think it's a little bit easier to talk about this because of all that's in the news around the Senate intelligence briefings and the Pentagon authenticating the Tic Tac UFO encounters and the pyramid-shaped UFO encounters, coming clean about having a unit that investigates UFO crashes. All that's in the news. We had Haim Eshed, the former Israeli chief of space security, the brigadier general who held that position for 27 years, just before Christmas, saying that on the basis of his work, his understanding is that there is an intergalactic federation that is in contact at a covert government level, but has chosen not to self-disclose. Now, when there's stuff like that in the news, it becomes a little bit easier to talk about ET contact in the present day. My books, The Scars of Eden and Escaping from Eden, say that contact is far older than 70 years. It goes back centuries and millennia. But still, we need, I think, books that will break the taboo and get us talking about these things. And so that's why I'm happy for the comparison, because that's the hope I have for my books.
Yeah, and you talk about translating the text of the past. Now, when I had Erich Von Daniken on my show, it was a very informative interview. Unfortunately, with me being a very fast talker, it kind of ruined the interview because Erich, not having learned English as a language in any school, he's not used to people speaking as fast as I was. I figured that. I also found that out when I was at a couple of Alien Con conferences, and he needed to have someone with him to help digest what people were asking him. And when I asked him a question, he actually needed the guy to help clarify what I was saying. And when I was doing the interview with him, I was talking so fast it kind of confused him on a few things. But still, it was informative interview. And but there were a couple of things that Erich Von Daniken said that kind of took me back. For one, he said that Zechariah Sitchin's interpretation is actually a mistranslation of the tablets. And I believe in one of the Alien presentations, he actually talked about how he thinks Nibiru is not so much a planet as it is an artificial construct of some sort, the Anunnaki-Son planet of Nibiru. And he also made it clear when I interviewed him that he is not really subscribing to what David Icke has glorified, the idea of the reptilian agenda. Now, the evidence, unfortunately, seems to suggest that David Icke and Zachariah Sitchin know exactly what they are talking about. Even Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartzis has validated those two. And Andrew Bartzis, I get a lot of flack for this, but I say that his ability to access the Akashic Records is probably the best way to get a definitive answer to a question. So if he says that the Akashic Records say it, and if the Akashic Records say it, it must be true. And he did say that Zachariah Sitchin's first 3 books in terms of the events are extremely accurate, even though his timelines may have been a little bit off. And then his 4th book onward, apparently he got compromised to some extent by forces that didn't want people to research his work, and they tried to compromise him. Leo Zagami, in my interview with him, talked a little bit about that. But he and David Icke did apparently know what they're talking about, and it was kind of a shame to hear that Erich Von Daniken doesn't seem to agree with them. I hate to cause conflict among people in similar areas of research, but can you maybe help make sense of why it is that people insist on disagreeing with other people's interpretations and translations? Oh, and before I give you the chance, I also want to point out that David Icke even admitted that when he was talking with Zachariah Sitchin about the Sumerian tablet translations, he asked Zachariah Sitchin, there's so much evidence of a reptilian or serpent race from ancient Sumeria, and you say jack squat about it in your books. What's up with that? And he claimed that Sitchin leaned across the table and told him and warned him, basically, don't go there, as though he was hinting, you talk about reptilian aliens, you're going to get your reputation tarnished. And maybe that's why Zechariah didn't talk about it. But everybody's got their own interpretations and what floats their boat. But what, in your opinion, what exactly is it that causes people to want to disagree and not accept others' interpretations, even though there seems to be sources out there that can validate someone as being accurate?
I don't think it's that people insist on disagreeing. It's that people do their own research and they come to slightly different conclusions. And I don't find that worrying or disturbing at all. I enjoy it when we researchers can compare notes. And I've been involved in a number of summits just recently where we said very openly, we don't all have to believe exactly the same thing to have a conversation. And I'm very happy to learn from other researchers who might say something slightly different to the conclusions I've reached. What I find interesting is where the overlap lies, because the overlap between people like Sitchin, Icke, Von Daniken, and now myself in the same field, I think is very significant. And I think people ought to notice that. The other aspect of this is not that people are necessarily disagreeing, but that people might choose what is the red pill I am going to offer the people. And so I say that because I know that there are some researchers who would agree with a lot of what I'm saying, who might not go there publicly because they're pushing a slightly different boat. They've got another red pill to offer the public, and they don't want to be too broad in their focus because they just want to keep the integrity of their logic very clear, knowing that if people will take that red pill, follow that white rabbit, they will end up in exactly the same rabbit warren that we're all in. So I do respect the fact that people will have different emphases in what they're bringing to the public or that their books focus on, so on and so forth. And I think there's perfectly legitimate disagreement on how to interpret ancient texts in an ancient language. It would be surprising if we all thought exactly the same thing. When I was researching for Escaping from Eden, when I began that journey, I'd never heard of Zechariah Sitchin. To my shame, but I was partway through researching Escaping from Eden. I was coming to these conclusions that the Bible is actually full of ETs, and then I discovered him, and I thought, oh gosh, what am I going to do now? Should I stop, read everything Sitchin wrote, and then get back to doing my research and writing my book? And I thought, no, I'm not going to do that because I'm not writing a he said, she said book. I'm doing my own research on the basis of my own logic, looking at these texts on the basis of my training. And if what I say overlaps in any way with what Zecharia Sitchin says, that makes it interesting. The fact that we've come separately to very similar conclusions ought to make it interesting. And so that was the decision I took. And I discovered by the end of my research, my research did overlap to a great degree with Sitchin's, not 100%. I don't draw the same conclusions about Nibiru that he does. And both of us come to our conclusions on the basis of reading the texts, working out what's going on in them. My conclusion is that Nibiru is a space station or a mothership slash space station, and that it is artificial. But I don't see that in any way as an attack on Zecharia Sitchin. I would absolutely honor Zecharia Sitchin again as an incredibly important gateway researcher who confronted the world with the ET aspect of the Mesopotamian corpus, the text of the cuneiform tablets. I think prior to Zecharia Sitchin, the presence of ETs in those texts was somewhat brushed under the carpet, and he made it impossible for us to do that. So I don't go out with an argument with Zecharia Sitchin. I take my hat off to him, but it doesn't mean that we believe exactly the same things as each other. I think what's interesting to the public, the researcher, people wanting to get into this topic, is to notice how much overlap there is between 19th century scholars like Nathaniel Schmidt, 20th century scholars like Sitchin, writers like myself in the 21st century, and say, if they are reaching that much agreement, then it's something I should give my attention to. So that's how I frame all that. It doesn't worry me that there are bits of disagreement here and there. The overlap, I think, is really important. And I think, I don't know why he might have said, don't go there. But, you know, all of us who get into this field take our reputations in our hands, take our lives in our hands when we venture into this field, knowing full well that the moment you open your mouth and say ET or alien or draconian or whatever it might be, knowing that people are going to write you off as a buffoon and a halfwit. But that's a price worth paying if it means that people are talking about the topic once again.
Thank you. Let's switch gears for a moment about specific UFO sighting here, in which you seem to want to talk about here regarding something James Fox, this guy, talked about this UFO encounter that took place at the Ariel School in rural of Zimbabwe. It is one of the most profound UFO cases ever documented. It can be seen featured within the Hill documentary "The Phenomenon" by James Fox. It says here the Ariel School sighting. I believe this is the school, UFO sighting. I'm thinking about the school in Africa, where in Zimbabwe, where um, the students claim they saw something, and we're all like drawing the images and whatnot. Is that the only one that happened in Africa? Well, apparently it is the most famous one. For those that haven't heard about this, why don't you talk about this, what exactly this was all about, this UFO sighting, and for that matter, were there actually others? I'm sure that there must have been other cases like this that happened around Africa, and other parts of the world for that matter, but this one, for some reason, for reasons, is more glorified and more profound than the others. And maybe you can get into why that is.
Yes, but it's certainly, by no stretch of the imagination, the only UFO encounter in Africa. But the reason that people talk about that one in particular, and what makes it so special, is that very soon after this was a mass sighting at a school of a landed craft and of entities moving around outside the craft. The reason this one has so gripped people is that very soon after the encounter, television cameras were there at the school. Professor John Mack, the head at that time of Harvard's Department of Clinical Psychology, had turned up and were interviewing the children on camera about what they had seen. And that's what makes it so affecting, that you can watch that for yourself and you can judge for yourself, are these children telling the truth or not? And if you watch the phenomenon, and you watch the footage of the children from Rua Aerial School, judge for yourself. Are they telling the truth? What did they see? What was the significance of it? And you can read the children for yourself, read their faces, read their voices, and I find it tremendously moving. In my book, The Skies of Eden, talk about another landing at a school in 1966 at Westall in the suburbs of Melbourne. And one of the reasons that encounter has gripped me, again, is because it's an encounter with children who very innocently simply report what they saw. And in the case of Westall, the school forbade them to talk about it. More than 200 students and staff had witnessed these three craft over their school. It was an encounter that lasted several minutes. Within minutes, the police, the military, the Air Force, government agencies were out there on the site. And yet by the afternoon, all the kids had been wheeled into an assembly and threatened with suspension and detention if they ever mentioned what happened. They were told what you saw is a weather balloon, you say any different, and you're in detention. And they were threatened. There were other authorities who turned up and, for instance, forcibly removed the camera from the hands of the chemistry teachers so that that footage could be sequestered. The footage of the interview with the children conducted by Channel 9 has been taken, has been missing ever since. And again, it's that contrasting the response with the report of the children themselves. 50 years later, we can now hear from the same children who had that encounter, their reflections on the encounter. And so that's very interesting. Do they still interpret it the way they did originally? How do they report it today? How did it affect their lives? That's what makes those cases so interesting and moving. I'd encourage anyone to watch the phenomenon and ask for themselves what they think happened.
Thank you for getting into that. Let's backtrack for a moment. You mentioned earlier the term, I think you mentioned Elohim, and I don't know if you mentioned also the term Nephilim, but I want to get into explaining what this is all about because Zechariah Sitchin and others have said that the terms Elohim, Anunnaki, and Nephilim can be used interchangeably, but they should all not be considered one and the same. Not all Nephilim are Elohim, not all Anunnaki are Elohim, and any other combination you could think of between the three. It does not necessarily mean that that one is all of them are that one. It's all a factional kind of thing.
Yes.
So could you, to the best of your knowledge, could you explain the compare and contrast, I guess, best way I can phrase the question, Elohim, Anunnaki, and Nephilim?
Absolutely. Well, that's a point where I'm absolutely agreed with Zechariah Sitchin. I've come to the exact same conclusion. The Elohim, that word means the powerful ones. That tells us that there were entities on planet Earth who were more powerful than the human beings and who were involved in colonizing and governing Project Earth. The Elohim stories, many of them in the Bible, parallel and summarize the Anunnaki stories of the Mesopotamian texts. Now, Elohim means the powerful ones. Anunnaki, people debate over what it means. I agree with Zechariah Sitchin that it refers to people who came from the skies, from the heavens to planet Earth. Now, that word, therefore, neither word, Elohim nor Anunnaki, convey a particular genus or species. It just says they're more powerful and they came from the skies. Some people argue it would be better to translate Anunnaki as astronauts, because that just says where they came from. And when you look at the conflicts, and these are really very thoroughly unpacked in the Sumerian and biblical stories, it seems very clear we've got very different factions with very different agendas on planet Earth. And you get to the story of the Bene Elohim, the sons of the powerful ones. In fact, I think it means ones like the powerful ones. And what you have in the Bible's narrative, it comes in Genesis 6, seems to reflect a second wave of ETs on a different agenda, doing something that completely transgresses the rules and regulations that have been set up previously for engagement. And so I think there were various extraterrestrial species and demographics involved. In the Bible, they're in a group called the Sky Council, where they conflict over what should be done about the human race, how the planet should be managed. And when I say conflict, I mean wars, and wars in which thousands and tens of thousands of human beings are killed in the process. So the Nephilim, where they come into it, is from the second wave of ETs that's named in the Bible in Genesis 6. And they turn up. They're called the Watchers in the book of Enoch, which unpacks this whole episode. And they turn up and hybridize with the human beings. Now, this isn't the first hybridization, because as the Sumerian stories make clear, Homo sapiens sapiens is a hybridization of earthling, hominid, and a bit of Anunnaki, a bit of ET. These have turned up and found a more developed Homo sapiens, and they interbreed with them, they hybridize with them. That story says that there was something different about the offspring. These entities were similar enough to human beings they could hybridize, but different enough that the offspring were different. They didn't have a growth inhibitor in them. So they may have been born as a perfectly normal looking human being, but they just keep growing and growing and growing. Josephus, the Jewish historian, makes the equation between that story, the story of the Nephilim, and the Greek stories of the Titans, who were the result of hybridization in the Greek stories. In fact, this narrative of hybridization is repeated all around the world. You can go to Africa, the Caribbean, the Philippines, India, Mesoamerica, Europe. Listen to the Celtic peoples. They all have narratives, the Norse stories as well, of course, stories of hybridization that result in a great stink and controversy among the demographics on the Sky Council. So that's a really interesting collage of stories that we've got. But essentially, yes, the Elohim represents various ET factions, Anunnaki, various ET factions, Nephilim, hybridized beings, and those stories have different names, different language all around the world, but our ancestors around the globe repeat that story, and that ought to catch our attention. And it's a story that's unbroken to the present day. We don't hear it so much. We don't hear a lot of people saying, I was abducted, I had an alien baby, because it's not something that's going to help them be taken seriously or get a job or make any money. They're going to make a fool of themselves. But that story is still present, held very tightly by women all around the world. And it's the same story that's been told for thousands of years.
Thank you for elaborating on that. Now let's talk about the Greeks for a moment. There is something here on your blog post title page saying the ancient Greeks knew the truth. Plato, Socrates, and others recorded the truth. Interesting thing about the Greek texts. When I was at a MUFON conference, actually I just got back from a MUFON conference, first conference, and it seems like forever from this all the shutdowns
Nice.
we've had. I finally got to go to a conference. It was a MUFON conference. Unfortunately, one of the presentations on Saturday morning after the Friday talks was about Planet X and Nibiru. I unfortunately missed that because I had too many hors d'oeuvres on Friday night and with terrible heartburn on Saturday morning. Couldn't get out of bed until about noon because of that. So I missed that. I do plan on contacting the person though who did that presentation and the other morning presentations for that matter to get them to come on my show so I can hear what I missed. And he did mention Zechariah Sitchin, I heard in that presentation a few times, but I bring this up because it was at another MUFON conference when some lady who knew Zechariah personally, I brought to her attention the fact that even though Akashic Records creator Andrew Bartz asserts that Sitchin's first 3 books in terms of the events are extremely accurate, a lot of people have a very difficult time accepting the idea that Sitchin could have been accurate. Among other reasons, Michael Heiser did an analysis of the Sumerian tablets, and he found that the terms Anunnaki and Nibiru don't actually appear together in any meaningful way that would allow someone to come up with the conclusions that Sitchin had come up with. So I asked the lady, how could Sitchin have come to the conclusions that he came to when the Sumerian tablets didn't even say anything that resonated with what he concluded? And she mentioned that while it's not talked about much, the Greek text Sitchin did actually look at, and it was from some of the Greek texts that enabled him to come to the conclusions that he came to. It was a while back when she explained this. There were some other things she said that I can't remember, unfortunately, but she did mention that Sitchin did look at the Greek texts and come to the conclusions from them, and why exactly that's not really talked about in all the many sources out there that talk about Zechariah, I don't know. But you did mention here the ancient Greeks knew the truth. Plato, Socrates recorded the truth. So, do you have anything to say about that matter?
Yes, I think that in a number of our ancient stories of beginnings are multiple layers. I think the main storyline that we can access in our ancestral narratives goes back about 10,000 years to the most recent reboot of civilized life on Earth following the Clovis comet impact and the Younger Dryas cold period from 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. I think it's that flooding, that cataclysm, and the recovery from that we hear recalled in most of our stories of origins. But I think there is other information in the mix that has come from previous civilizations. And from that context, I think there are hints and mentions of a history that is not only going back into geological time, but goes into the history of our solar system. And I think that there is a knowledge of the movement of planets and the alteration of the configuration of our solar system that exists within some of these stories. What I find intriguing in the Greek context is that Plato, who is universally acknowledged as one of the greatest minds of human history, had pulled together an understanding of origins, that's cosmic origins, planetary origins, human origins, synthesized what he'd learned from all different sources, and then presented it in a way that for the day was quite scientific, so that most of his conclusions were built on things we all observe and then logic applied to those things. But he had other sources of information, and he said he had knowledge that had been curated by the ancient priesthood of ancient Egypt, which had come to him through one of the students of Socrates, who had got that information from his grandfather Solon, who's a real historical figure, and he'd been entrusted with this information by Egyptian priests. And that knowledge spoke about periodic cataclysms impacting life on Earth, taking life on Earth or civilization on Earth to a virtual zero and requiring a reset. And he said that what caused these cataclysms was the movement of, and then he uses a word, objects in space, we could say, and that word could mean the movement of planets, or objects like the moon, or objects like asteroids. And so there he's beginning to reference this other knowledge about the history of our solar system and its impact on planet Earth. Of course, we've got interplanetary wars hinted at in a number of our texts, including the Sumerian and the biblical and the Greek. And so that's why that is part of the story. And I think Sitchin was a scholar of those texts as well, and his understanding of other planets and the movement of planets would have been rooted in that. Now, that's not an area I've gone into in great depth, but you can't miss that it's there when that layer of the story repeats from cultures all around the world.
Thank you for. Sorry about that. Thank you for touching on that. And
and I just mentioned, because this is something a lot of people are aware of Plato, and they may even have studied him. When I was at Bible college, Theological College, training to be a pastor, we all had to read a bit of Plato, and somehow I came away remembering none of the really interesting bits. But that bit about planetary resets, I think, is interesting, and something that adds some credibility to Plato's synthesis of all this is that he had a pretty good go at describing what the planet Earth looks like from a distance in space. Now, given that, 1.5 millennia later, people were still arguing that the Earth is flat, indeed, some people still believe that today, he had reached the point not only of saying it's a globe floating in space, but he could describe what it looked like in terms that we wouldn't have used prior to the 1960s, because we didn't know what it looked like until Apollo 8 took a photograph in the 1960s showing the globe floating in space and what it looks like. Before that, we all imagined that the planet looked like a school globe, blue sea, golden land, and you watch the early seasons of Star Trek, the original series, that's what the planets look like. By the time you get to 1968, that's all changed, and we now realize it's this very swirly looking pattern of white cloud and blue ocean and green and gold land, and that is how Plato described it. And I think the moment you read that description in Plato is the moment you should stop and ask, how on earth did he know this? And you have to start taking seriously the sources that he names, which are ancestral knowledge, logic applied to things we all observe, and coming back to what you were saying, Andrew, about the Akashic record, because I don't want to minimize that, and Plato said, altered states of consciousness wherein we can download information from another dimension. That was his language for accessing the Akashic record. So if he's allowed onto that territory and people take him so seriously, then they ought not to raise an eyebrow when that same language and those same frameworks are used today.
Very, very well said there. Now moving on to another area here on your blog page, the amazing secrets of water, and the video here has a picture of Dr. Masaru Emoto. Interestingly, Ted Marr, who I'm going to have on my show again this Friday, I did recently see an interview where he did, and he actually asserted that Emoto was murdered by the Chinese Communist government. Don't really need to get into the conspiratorial stuff in this interview, but I had never heard that up until he pointed that out. And why would they wait until that exact moment that they decided to kill him to kill him? I mean, how long has his research been out in the open before then, or had it become so popular at that point that they decided to take him down? I don't know, but this thing here, it says water, a living substance, the most common and least understood. It defies the basic laws of physics, yet holds the key to life. So many things about water that we don't understand. And I've heard from some ET contactees that the reason the ETs are so interested in Earth, well, among other many reasons, is because Earth has a relatively high amount of water relative to other worlds. So I guess I'll give you the chance to glorify water more so than others have, Dr. Emoto, and everything else that goes with it. What do you have to say about it?
Well, Dr. Emoto did indeed pioneer this topic at a popular level in modern times. And when I came across his work, I was fascinated by it because I've had experiences in ministry that suggest that water can carry memory in a very special way. And I don't want to say too much detail. I'd love for people to go and read my story about the healing of water on my website, paulanthonywallis.com, because it's a fascinating story, and it's about an experience of community healing. Now, when I was a church doctor, I would from time to time be engaged to go to a church that had problems and seek to fix them before the next pastor came, because often these problems would recur, and they were problems to do with governance, corporate health, mental health, physical health, and these horrible very dark patterns would repeat in the stories of these communities decade after decade. Well, I worked as an intentional interim, and the intentional interim's job is to go and work out why this is happening and fix it before another pastor goes in, because they don't want to put another pastor in to be chewed up and spat out by whatever's going on there. And so it's ministry that really often crosses over into the area of the paranormal. And I went into a particular community, and part of what I had to do, so I discovered, was the healing of the waters. Now, I'd never really heard of this. I'd never been taught about this in my training, but I had read about it in ancient texts. Stories of places where there was a horrible atrocity or trauma, and then the memory of it is held in the land. You know, people talk about cursed land, or somewhere that you don't go because of bad juju or bad spirits over the water. Different cultures have different language for it. And stories like that are there in the Bible. So when I began to sense through a series of synchronicities that there was something wrong, not only with the human experience in this area, but the land had been affected, the water had been affected, I went to the Bible to try and get some answers of, well, what do I do about this? And I got some answers, and I did those things, and there was a very dramatic before and after in terms of the health of the people in that area. Now, I had to do all that blind, so to speak. I had to follow my nose in working out what does it mean for water in an area to be traumatized by something that has happened. And I just had to put together what my response would be. And it was after doing all that that I discovered Masaru Emoto and read his book, and I thought, well, this is actually putting some language and some scientific ideas around phenomena that have been talked about for hundreds and thousands of years. And now there are other scientists and researchers talking about exactly the same thing. Our bodies are comprised of 70% water, and so the health of the water that we consume is very important to our physical health. And if only for that reason, we should be interested in the question of how do we curate our water for maximum health. We have the most tragic and sad experiences to reflect on in the recent past. If I only mention Flint, Michigan, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But access to safe, fresh drinking water is going to be a huge issue in the 21st century, as there's a big tussle over who does it belong to. Is it a right for corporations over and above individual human beings to have access to drinking water? And that's a rather deeper question than it first appears. And you can read that entirely at that natural level. Safe, clean drinking water is absolutely primordial. Go to the ancient texts and you realize that water not only is impacted by physical phenomena, but it's impacted by emotional, spiritual, transdimensional phenomena. And I don't want to say too much more than that, because I just want to whet people's appetite for that story on my website, The Healing of Water.
Fair enough on that matter. Boy, I don't know if you can hear the thunder in the background. It's getting kind
Okay.
of loud around here. I hope there's no power outage here. But almost reached the hour point, but I think we could get a few more questions in here.
Sure.
There's documented here. Paul asks if evidence of prehistoric ET contact may have been hidden or ignored. Well, I did mention earlier how in my interview with Leo Zagami, he mentioned that Zecharia Sitchin was compromised, and I believe that could explain why Zecharia Sitchin's fourth book onward are not as accurate as his first three books in terms of the events. There's evidences of prehistoric ET contact may have been hidden or ignored, and he was a victim of that in some regard. Interestingly, Fred Springmeier in his book Bloodlines of the Illuminati, when I had Fred Springer on my show, I asked him if he could refresh my memory and mention exactly who this guy was, but he didn't actually remember it. I do remember, though, when I read that book, Bloodlines of the Illuminati, there was a very out of the blue interesting fact pointing out that some guy who has connections to one of the Illuminati bloodlines is either the editor or the publisher of Erich Von Daniken's books. And when I was at a ancient Alien Con conference, I asked Erich Von Daniken, what would you say if I told you that Fred Springmeier said this in your book? Does this lead you to believe that maybe the powers that be are stalking you and trying to keep an eye on you because after you wrote some of your books, they thought you're a threat to their agenda because you're going to reveal things about humanity's past that they don't want people to reveal? And I don't remember exactly what his answer was, but I do remember that it didn't really answer the question. He actually needed the guy who was with him to help him make sense of what I was asking him, because I'm a fast talker and I had a lot of detail in my question there, but I did point that out. So I don't know if you have anything you want to say about this, but this thing, Paul asks if evidence of prehistoric ET contact may have been hidden or ignored. Well, I'm sure it's definitely hidden or ignored. In fact, in the case of Egypt, Dr. Zahi Hawass, I don't believe he holds the position anymore, but I watched a few episodes of Chasing Mummies on the History Channel back in the day, and you mention anything at all about evidence for aliens, he would fire you right on the spot. Clearly, he must have had an agenda to hide or ignore the evidence, and he's not the only one. So what do you have to say about this subject matter?
Well, yes, in The Scars of Eden, I talk about various historical examples of our ancestral knowledge of ET contact being deliberately shut down and censored. It happens in the process of the formation of the Hebrew canon, the Old Testament, where we get to a translation, a redaction that's done in the 6th century BCE. And there's a very broad scholarly agreement that this happened. There was an edit done in the 6th century BCE that sought to harmonize all the books of the Hebrew canon so that they were seamlessly singing from the same song sheet, so to speak. And the purpose of that redaction was for the whole library of Hebrew scriptures to put out the message: there is only one God, the source of the cosmos, and his name is Yahweh. And so they pasted the name, the holy name of God, into much earlier texts and airbrushed out some of the evidences of ET contact that were in those scriptures. So all the stories of the powerful ones becomes the stories of God. Stories of wars between competing powerful ones, they become stories of worship versus idolatry, the chosen people versus the enemies of God, so on and so forth. It reframes the whole story. And it was, you could say, a deliberate cover-up of the ET narratives of the Bible. Now, those translators might have felt they were being completely faithful to their tradition. After all, the Ten Commandments more or less forbids the memory of the other powerful ones. It says you shall have no other powerful ones other than Yahweh. Don't bow down to them. Don't depict them. And yet the shape of the story is still there. There's an acknowledgement that they exist. And then you go to Joshua, the leader who followed Moses, and he puts out a call. He says, cut yourselves off from the powerful ones your ancestors served in Mesopotamia. Don't work for the powerful ones of the Amorites in this land or of the Egyptians where we were before. We are going to work for Yahweh. And again, there's an acknowledgement there are these other entities, the other powerful ones. So the shape of the story is still there when you go and reread, but the language that's used, the translation choices made, obscure the fact that there are these other kinds of entities, these ET entities in the story. So even within the story of Judaism, it's there. It's there in the story of Christianity. Right at the beginning of Christian history, there were some very significant church fathers who were saying what I'm saying. They were saying the Elohim stories are stories of a different kind of entity. They're not God's stories. They were open to stories of our evolution having been tampered with by extraterrestrial visitors. This is what Plato said, and they accepted what Plato said. They had language for these visitors, for astral travel, other phenomena, and at the beginning, Christianity was a kaleidoscope of views and ideas and documents and theologies like that. And bit by bit, there's a narrowing of orthodoxy so that the church fathers saying what I'm saying got pushed out. So Marcion, who was clearest on this agenda, was declared a heretic in 144 of the Common Era. And despite having a huge influence across Eastern Europe, we can't find a single thing he wrote because all his works were destroyed. Other documents were clearly not going to get into the canon as orthodoxy narrowed down, and they were literally buried in the Nag Hammadi desert to stop them from being destroyed, to try and preserve some of this ancient knowledge. And the history of Christianity in the empire is a story of orthodoxization, turning into heretics and enemies of the state, anyone who carries these ancestral narratives. Everything gets conducted in Latin. There's a suppression of local language, so you can no longer read the ancient narratives talking about ET contact. That's how we reached the point where we could no longer read the ancient hieroglyphs of Egypt to understand their version of these stories. For a more recent example of suppression, and I tell it because it's very graphic, but it's just an illustration of what does happen. When the Catholic forces of Portugal and Spain went into Central and South America, they went in with their letters patent from the kings of Portugal and Spain and the Pope to use whatever force was necessary to subdue those countries, take them for the church. And when you go into somebody else's country to take over, you become the police force, you become the news agency, you become the school teachers, you decide what's true and what's false. And if you, the conquerors, say there was no massacre in such and such a square when you took over the country, then there was no massacre. And you shut down the other news agencies, you declare them all false news. And in the case of Central and South America, that meant executing the priesthoods and burning all their documents concerning human origins, which were very open about the ET aspect. Now, we know what was destroyed because aside from the choice copies that went into the Vatican Library and the libraries of the kings of Spain and Portugal, there were survivors of the ancient priesthoods and there were surviving texts. We know that because 200 years later, a group of those priests resurfaced with one of those texts in the Quiche language, and they presented it to a Dominican friar called Francisco Jimenez and said, "Would you be interested in our story of beginnings?" Well, 200 years after the invasion, here was a priest who was interested, and he translated it into Spanish. It became the Popol Vuh, and it's one of the most interesting documents we have in terms of finding another pristine source talking about genetic engineering in our distant past, talking about ET visitors who nurtured Homo sapiens as we know ourselves to be. And it becomes one of those interesting correlations that then matches other indigenous knowledge around the world. But that's just one example of how folkloric knowledge gets shut down, is not going to find its way into the textbooks or onto the TV or the equivalent of the day. It will be deleted and replaced by the official line. And in the case of Central and South America, the official line was the Roman Catholicism of the day. Now, suppression, of course, has continued from that time to this. Even though we're now in this period of what looks like soft disclosure, there's always a blend of disclosure and cover up at the same time. You know, when things are declassified, you might be looking at a declassified document. That's lovely. What was the document that was not declassified? Or you might get a declassified document. That's great. What are the bits in black that were redacted? So, of course, the powers that be will always want to manage the flow of information. So you're never going to get total disclosure, and there'll always be an element of cover up. But we're in an interesting chapter at the moment, I think, where some disclosure, some awareness is clearly wanted. Maybe, I would suggest, sort of as an insurance policy against disclosures being made that are out of control of our governments. But that's the territory we seem to be in now. So we're out of that period where researchers might be assassinated, as I think has happened in the recent past, certainly was happening while I was growing up, and now into a period where the topic is allowed to be discussed, and we need to have some awareness of what's going on. I think that's why Hayam Eshed came out as he did before Christmas and spoke so openly about the Intergalactic Federation, because we need to be ready for a bit more information getting out there into the public sphere.
Yeah, and it's driving me crazy to keep hearing stuff about humanity's not being ready
I agree.
to hear the truth. It's very disturbing that they keep postponing things because of that unfortunate little blip here. Interesting you mentioned, funny you mentioned though that people aren't really necessarily getting killed anymore. Mark McIndish was a guest on my show back in the day. He recently died of what was said to be, I think, suicide, but I seriously doubt that that was the case. Elena Kapolnik did a sort of a roast on his work on her channel if people want to check that out, and also listen to the interview that I did with him. He's no longer with us. Just thought I'd point that out. Hope he wasn't murdered, but I can't imagine he would commit suicide at the same time. All right, we've got a little past the hour point. I guess I'll ask you one more question and then a plug question and all.
Okay.
Mentioning here the Fifth Kind TV you work with. The Fifth Kind, that's everybody's heard of the Close Encounters of the First, Second, and Third Kind. Steven Spielberg has, of course, popularized the Third Kind with that movie. But there is a fourth kind and a fifth kind too. I don't know if there's anything past that. I believe Stephen Greer is trying to also popularize the fifth kind with his with the work he does. Does this specifically talk about the pertain to the fifth kind of encounter, or is that just a marketing gimmick that you are using with this?
Well, it's certainly an intriguing name, the Fifth Kind TV, and maybe some people come to work out, oh, what is the fifth kind? People are mostly familiar with the first three, and then people have interpolated other degrees. We're not particularly focused on the fifth kind. We're not particularly focused on the communication aspect with extraterrestrial intelligences. We actually look at a whole range of subjects to do with the cosmos, the paranormal, ET narratives. The Fifth Kind TV also interviews some very interesting scholars and researchers who look into Earth's distant past. So we had Michael Tellinger with us very recently talking about that. We had Barbara Lamb, who does talk about close encounters, abductions, communication, and the hybridization narrative. And we've spoken to others about that as well. Richard Dolan, Erich Von Daniken was a very exciting moment to be interviewing him on the Fifth Kind TV. And so we do range around a bit on topics adjacent to this. And what I found when I wrote Escaping from Eden and The Scars from Eden is that once you have followed the white rabbit down the rabbit hole, you realize you're in a huge rabbit warren where all these topics join up. It's very quickly, if you're talking about close encounters, you're talking about consciousness, the nature of reality, the holographic universe. What is the soul? What are we? Are we consciousness first, material second? You're talking about manifesting. You're talking about extra-dimensional, interdimensional beings. You're talking about our distant past. You're talking about folkloric knowledge, and they all join up. And what I find exciting is that when I compare notes with other researchers, when we produce our books, we all have to say, oh my goodness, how do I stop this being a book about everything? And you have to focus on a particular thing that you're following. But where it seems to lead is, how do we live our lives? What does it mean to live as a human being and fulfill our potential in this material life? And there's an appetite that comes from seeing how these subjects join up that I find tremendously exciting and that really drives me ongoingly in my research.
Well, best of luck on whatever future research you do. You've done a lot of fascinating research, and a lot of fascinating info has come as a result of that. And it was a pleasure I could have you on the show. So I'd like to give you the chance now, as we close this out, to get anything you'd like to get out. And by all means, plug your sites, your work, make a sales pitch out of the work that you've done, the books you've written, and close us out well on this
All right.
day of lunar eclipse in Sagittarius. Super moon.
Indeed. Oh, thank you, Andrew, so much. Well, The Scars of Eden and Escaping from Eden are really gateway books. They're intended that you could give them to absolutely anybody with a zero interest in the subject, somebody who gives this zero credibility, and it'll take them from zero to thinking, oh my goodness, there's something serious here to give some attention to. And you can get The Scars of Eden, Escaping from Eden from Amazon, Kindle, Barnes and Noble, Hive, Book Depository, wherever books are sold. And if you would like to get into conversation with me, because I love dialoguing with my readers, you can go to the Fifth Kind TV on YouTube, go to the Paul Wallis channel on YouTube, come to my website, paulanthonywallis.com, Anthony with an H, Wallis, WALLIS.com, and I love to get into conversation with you. I'm always there in the comments having discussions with people. A lot of my work these days is in personal coaching, helping people to process experiences they've had that don't fit with the world they thought they lived in. And so you come to my website if you'd like to get into a coaching arrangement with me that way. But all those places, you can go there and you can keep up with the work I'm doing and find out what's in the pipeline.
Thank you very, very much. So, Paul Wallis, pleasure having you on. Best of luck to you. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the lunar eclipse energies as they end us on this glorious, significant day. I'm sure it will be. Lunar eclipses
Indeed.
always bring something special, and the moon set, I believe, or yeah, the moon rise actually happened just a few minutes after, minutes before I had this interview. So the energies, I'm sure, were definitely with us, even though the eclipse happened this morning and wasn't able to see it in this part of the world. The energies are still with us, and the moon is up in the sky now. So I'm going to be getting right to my full moon ritual as soon as I hang up on you. I've gotten a lot of benefits from those rituals, and I'm sure I'll get a lot of benefits from this one as well. I'm an Aries, and Sagittarius is one of my fellow fire signs. So best of luck.
Good on you.
Take care. Namaste. Good luck. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to be with you.